evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite books from 2023. I know this video is coming out a little bit later than a lot of the other top 10 books videos, but I really wanted to wait until the end of the year to make sure that I wasn't going to miss a book that ended up being in my top 10 because I was still finishing books up at the end of December. So I wanted to wait till January to make sure that I really could evaluate the entire year. And then also I got sick, so that delayed it a little bit. I'm still kind of sick, so if you can hear that in my voice, I apologize. And then also I tried to record this video previously and had some technical difficulties. So here we are, and with that all said, let's jump into my top 10 favorite books. These are not organized in any particular way. They are just kind of my top 10 favorites. I tried originally organizing them by least favorite to most favorite, but because I like them all for different reasons, I didn't really feel like it made sense to organize them in that way. So with that all said, let's start with my first top 10 book, and that is going to be Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I actually bought this book. A lot of the books on this list I got from the library, but I do actually happen to have a copy of Tress right here. I kind of wish I had gotten Tress from the library because then I would have known how much I liked it, and I could have gotten the leather-bound edition, which I like the cover art a little bit more on. I do still like the cover art of the one that I have, but I just like the leather-bound edition just slightly more. Either way, though, what Tress is about is that Tress is our main character, and she lives in a world where the oceans are, instead of water, they are spores, and these spores have a magical effect when they are struck by water, like from rain. She lives on the Emerald Sea, obviously, where all the spores are green, and the colors of the spores indicate what kind of effect they're gonna have. The green spores explode into vines when they are struck with water. And then we have a couple of other spore types, and they each do different things that are sometimes more useful, sometimes more deadly. And Tress is gonna find out about a lot of these because she has to travel the world looking for her best friend who has gone missing. She has an idea of where to go, but in order to get there, she's going to have to get on a pirate ship. So a lot of this story is a sailing story where Tress is on a pirate ship trying to get herself to where her best friend is. I really loved the characterization in this one. I loved the world building. A lot of the pirates were really fun. This one was inspired by The Princess Bride, and you can definitely feel it in the energy of the book. It's a very light, adventure-based, funny, romantic story, and I really loved it for all of those reasons. It also helped pull me out of a reading slump, which I really appreciated it for. I've definitely got a soft spot for Tress now. If you have read Mistborn, Tress does not feel anything like Mistborn. It feels much lighter, much happier. There are still dark moments, but it is much, much cozier than Mistborn. So I really loved Tress. Next on this list is The Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura. So this is it has a fantasy element to it, but for the most part, it feels much more focused on the daily lives of the main character and the characters she happens to know. So what this book is about is that our main character is in middle school and she stops going to school because she's being bullied. And when she stops going to school, there's a light in her mirror, and she is able to walk through that mirror into a castle. And the castle has 6 other people in it. So you watch as these characters bond and grow and unravel the mystery of this castle and why they're all here and how they're all connected. So I really loved this story. It's just a tale of friendship, basically, and emotional difficulty that each of the characters are dealing with. You only follow the main character, but you get a good amount of the other characters through her eyes. And I thought it was a really sweet story. It has this distant, dreamlike kind of quality to it, which I really enjoyed. It felt like the emotions that the character is going through, so I loved it for that. The way that it wrapped up in the end was also really sweet and really wonderful. So overall, this is a great story about youth and friendship. Next on this list is Malamander by Thomas Taylor. This one is going to be a fantasy and mystery for the middle grade age range. And it is about Herbert Lemon, who is a young boy who runs the Lost and Found at his hotel that he lives at. And he lives in a place called Erie-on-Sea, which is this mysterious town that has a cryptid called the Malamander living in it. And the Malamander is like a cross between a man and a fish and also some other mysterious elements. The Malamander was a great aspect of the book, but what I loved this book for were the characters and the setting. I thought Erie-on-Sea was so interesting. I can't wait to read more in this series. And I loved Herbert Lemon and all the other interesting characters that he runs into. This book definitely felt inspired by the Lemony Snicket books, A Series of Unfortunate Events, and All the Wrong Questions. There's a similar vibe to it, but it's much less dark. It does have some darkness to it, but it doesn't have that same sort of dark comedy element that those books have. But if you liked A Series of Unfortunate Events or All the Wrong Questions and wanted more of a fantasy element, I would definitely recommend this for that. There's even a harpoon gun, so if you like the harpoon gun aspect, check this out. Specifically, the story kicks off when Violet Parma, a young girl, comes to Herbert Lemon with the request of helping find out what happened to her parents. They disappeared some years ago, and it has something to do with the Malamander. So she thinks that Herbert Lemon is going to be the perfect person to figure out what happened because he's the lost and founder. He finds lost things, and her parents are lost. So she asks for his help, and even though he's a little bit uncertain, he does join her on this quest, and the adventure unfolds from there. So this is a great fantasy story for, I think, any age. Next on this list is Vampire Blood Drive by Mira Chua. And this is a sapphic romance graphic novel. So it is pretty different from the rest of the books that I've mentioned so far. This one's definitely for adults, and it has some spice to it. This follows our main character as she goes to a blood drive and finds out that she is not donating her blood to other humans, but she's actually donating to a vampire. And the vampire she gets paired with is a very dapper lady who is very sweet and interesting, and sparks fly between them right away. And so this follows their romance through a series of short stories, and this is kind of a compilation of those short stories. This was such a fun, fresh, romantic story. I don't usually like romances that are only romance. I really like there to be other elements to it, like fantasy or other things like that. I'm not really into just straight up romance. But I guess this counts as a fantasy romance as well because there's vampires. Either way, I really liked this. I love Mira Chua's work. They also wrote Goodbye Battle Princess Peony, which is another story that I really loved, kind of Sailor Moon-esque, but with more villain-heroine romance. Also Road Queen, which is great. They have a couple of other works that I'm interested in checking out, but I haven't got around to quite yet. And now, for something really different, again, we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This is a nonfiction book, and I think this is the first time a nonfiction has come into my top 10, mostly because I don't really read a lot of nonfiction. But I was interested in this book for a while, and then I happened to see it at the library, decided that I may as well pick it up and give it a try. And then I was on a train ride for like a total of 6 hours, and I read through most of it over the course of those 6 hours. This book is so sad, but I really enjoyed it. It has a kind of dark comedy sort of style to the writing, which I really enjoyed, which made it really readable and enjoyable. The writing style is it draws you in a lot. It's very simple and fast-paced, which made it really easy to read a lot of it, even though it was really sad. And so what this book follows is, like I said, it's nonfiction, so this is a memoir, and it is about Jennette McCurdy's early life as she is a child star, and especially the tumultuous, difficult relationship she has with her mother. Some parts of this were pretty hard to read because they are so sad, including the first line. Not the first line, but the first chapter did make me want to cry immediately, and this kept up throughout the rest of the book. There were a lot of moments that were really emotional and really emotionally challenging. I think it was really well done, and I'm really interested to see what Jennette McCurdy writes next. Overall, like I said, this was a really sad one, but I think really worth the read. But if you're going to read it, definitely check out the trigger warnings first because there's a lot of heavy stuff in here. Next on this list is Bloom Into You, and this is a sapphic young adult manga series. And I'm putting the whole series on here rather than one particular volume because I loved the series as a whole. And maybe that's cheating, but it's my list, so I'm going to do it anyway. This follows two girls who basically are trying to be in a relationship, but each of them is carrying emotional baggage that is making it difficult for them to be in that relationship. And so this follows them kind of working through their emotions and figuring out exactly what they want from each other. I thought it was so beautiful. The depth of emotion was great. There are a lot of great quotes about love and feeling. There's a lot of interesting themes in here, like, is it selfish to be romantic with someone or to love them or to ask love of them? I thought it was really interesting how selfishness and love and friendship and truth were all kind of tied together in this and really explored. It was a beautiful story and I thought it was fantastic. Definitely a recommended read if you want a sapphic story or really any romance story with those kind of themes. Next on this list is The House with Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. This is a Baba Yaga reimagining in which Baba Yaga sends on the souls of the dead, and she does so with the help of her granddaughter, Marinka. Marinka is our main character, and this is a middle grade story following mostly her. Marinka loves her grandmother very much, but she doesn't love their lifestyle. She doesn't like sending on the souls of the dead, and especially she hates that their house, which has chicken legs, gets up and runs away every couple of days while they're in it. So she cannot make friends because every few days the house leaves and she is unable to become rooted in the community in any meaningful way. So she is really lonely. So this book follows her as she tries to fix her problem of loneliness and then the complications that arise from her attempts to do that. I thought this one was so sweet and wholesome and emotional. I loved learning about the house and the Baba Yaga, and Marinka's struggles were really relatable as she tried to figure out how to make friends in a lasting way. I thought that was fantastic. The fantasy elements were good, but I think they take a backseat to the emotional elements of the relationship between Marinka and her grandmother. There are lots of secrets and reveals to be had in this book too, so if you want a slightly mysterious, emotional story, then I would definitely recommend The House with Chicken Legs. Next we have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. And Half a Soul follows Dora, I believe her name is, who has had part of her soul stolen by a fairy. And this takes place in Regency London. But it's obviously a fantastical version of Regency London because there are fairies. We follow Dora, who hasn't really been able to fit into society due to her half of the soul. And basically what it does is make her experience emotions differently than everyone else, in that she experiences them in a really muted way. And they have to be really, it's described as emotions with a long tail in the book. So emotions that are really long lasting are ones that she can feel, but if there's something really sudden, then she won't feel it as much. So like a sudden spike of rage, not so much as like a slow burning anger. So the story kicks off when our main character goes with her cousin, who she loves dearly, to London because her cousin is going to try to find a husband. So we follow Dora as she struggles through London society and meets a sorcerer with interesting powers who's very much a grump, had some Howl vibes. So if you liked Howl's Moving Castle, I would recommend this, or if you liked A Sorcery of Thorns, it has the same kind of feeling to me. I really loved the romantic lead. I loved Dora. I thought her struggles with feeling different were really interesting. While this is a cozy fantasy, there are also some moments that felt like they had some greater depth which I really enjoyed. I feel like cozy can sometimes mean to people that it's going to be like shallow and light and fun. And while there is some of that in this, I think there is also a balanced amount of depth and taking on not a darker theme, but a more challenging theme. And so I really loved this. I thought it was so beautiful and romantic and interesting. And I particularly liked that more challenging element that is introduced a little bit later in the story. Next on this list is actually the first book that I read in this year, and that is Harrow the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. This is the sequel to Gideon the Ninth, and I absolutely adored this book. I think I'm going to like it even more on a reread. What Gideon the Ninth and the Locked Tomb series is about is basically lesbian necromancers in space. And it's kind of a murder mystery. It's hard to explain what Harrow is about. And it's tricky because Harrow is kind of about something completely different than what Gideon the Ninth is about. And I can't really explain without giving away some aspects of Gideon the Ninth. But there are some themes in here that are really heavy-hitting and beautiful. Harrow the Ninth is told in second person, which is a huge negative to a lot of people from what I can tell, but it was something that I really liked because I thought it played into the themes of the book a little bit better. Plus, I just love Harrow. I love the entire cast of characters, and by love, I mean I do hate some of them, but I feel very emotionally charged with them, and that propels me through the story. Harrow in particular is a fantastic character. I absolutely love her. I loved the more world building of the universe that we get in this one. If you are not sure if you want to continue with Harrow the Ninth, I definitely highly recommend it. Yes, it is confusing, and yes, it is told in second person, but I think those two things actually make the story more satisfying once you get to the end. I thought it was really beautiful and really incredible. Even though I liked it slightly less than Gideon, I still absolutely adored it. Quick note, I also read Nona the Ninth this year. I liked Nona, but I didn't like it enough for it to make my top 10. Mostly because I feel like I don't understand the themes in Nona as clearly as I see them in Harrow, and that made me not like it quite as much. But I still loved Nona. I still gave it a pretty high rating on Storygraph, and I am so excited for Electo the Ninth. I say this in like every video, but I can't wait for Electo the Ninth to come out, and I really wish we would have a release date. But someday soon, hopefully. Either way, Harrow the Ninth was incredible. I can't wait to read it again. I think it's going to be fantastic and possibly even better on a reread now that I kind of know what's going on. Yeah, overall, an amazing sequel. And that brings us to the final book that I read this year and the final book on my top 10 list, which is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. Like I said, this was the last book I read this year, so I do possibly have some recency bias. But I absolutely loved this. This was inspired by Final Fantasy X, as well as a couple of other things that I'm not really familiar with, but I do love Final Fantasy X. So I was really excited to pick this up, and it did not let me down. I loved the characters in this book, but I especially loved the world building. In this book, we have two main characters, Yumi and Painter. Painter's real name is Nakaro, but he goes by Painter through most of this book. Yumi lives on this world that it has a low-hanging, hot sun, and the ground is always really hot, so everybody wears like tall clogs to keep from burning their feet, and the plants float off the ground. It's beautiful. Love that. And Painter lives in a world of eternal night, where everything is lit by Heon lines, which are like these teal and magenta lines that power everything and light up the night. I love that too. An eternal realm of night sounds fantastic to me. I love nighttime. So I loved both of their worlds. And then the story kicks off when they meet. And the circumstances around their meeting is very strange and very fun. There were some moments that were a little bit awkward, that were a little bit hard for me to get through because I do not like awkwardness very much. But I think it was worth it overall for especially the second 2/3 of the book. Because I would say the first third has some of that in it that I didn't really enjoy. But the second 2/3 were amazing. And I really absolutely adored them. I loved all the reveals. This book also made me cry. I think all of the books on this, except for maybe Vampire Blood Drive, probably made me cry because I am an easy crier. But I love to cry over books, so that's a victory for me. Overall, I loved the character arcs in this so much. Like I said, the world building was fantastic. This was just a beautiful, romantic, heart-wrenching story, and I can't recommend it enough. So those were all the books that I really loved in 2023. I am excited for this year. I've started off with a couple of books that have been already quite good. So I'm hoping that that is an omen of what's to come. I hope you had a good reading year in 2023. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and have a beautiful night, universe.